Long before we understood markets or salaries, we absorbed a simple equation: money equals safety. The adults around us repeated it in quiet ways. Study hard so you can secure your future. Choose wisely so you don't struggle later. Wealth was presented not as luxury, but as protection. A shield against humiliation, dependence, and uncertainty. It sounded responsible, mature, even moral. As we grew older, the promise expanded. Money did not just mean safety, it meant respect. The well-dressed were listened to. The successful were admired. Financial independence looked like freedom itself: no boss to fear, no bill to dread, no one to answer to. For ambitious minds, this vision was magnetic. So we chose degrees, careers, and sacrifices through that lens. But if wealth guarantees peace, why do those who have it often seem restless? Few ever question that quietly unsettling detail. At first, the goal seems clear. Earn a certain amount. Reach a specific milestone. Once you cross that line, you tell yourself, things will finally settle. The tension will ease. You will breathe differently. And for a moment, when the number appears in your account or the promotion becomes official, there is a brief rush. A small exhale. But it doesn't last. Almost immediately, the mind adjusts. The new level becomes normal. What once felt like abundance now feels average. A new benchmark forms quietly in the distance. Just a little more. A slightly higher standard. A larger cushion. The horizon shifts without asking permission. Income grows, yet anxiety does not shrink in proportion. In some cases, it sharpens. Responsibilities expand. Expectations rise. The sense of almost there never quite disappears. If satisfaction truly increases with accumulation, why does the baseline reset so quickly? Ambition is usually praised as strength. It looks disciplined, focused, admirable. But beneath that sharp surface, there is often something softer and more fragile. A quiet fear of being overlooked. Of not mattering. Of falling behind and never catching up. Wealth then becomes more than opportunity, it becomes insulation against humiliation. For many high achievers, the urgency is not only about growth. It is about avoidance. Avoiding dependence on others. Avoiding the shame of asking for help. Avoiding the image of being ordinary. Money promises distance from all of that. It feels like armor you can wear in any room. Yet armor is heavy. And when you never remove it, you begin to forget what it was protecting in the first place. If wealth is meant to protect you, what happens when your entire identity depends on keeping that protection intact? At what point does defense quietly become confinement? At this point, it would be easy to dismiss the criticism of wealth as envy or moral posturing. That is why the voice we turn to matters. Seneca was not an outsider condemning riches from a place of deprivation. He was a Roman statesman, an advisor to emperors, and one of the wealthiest men of his time. He understood privilege from the inside. This tension is what makes him difficult to ignore. He enjoyed influence, property, and status, yet he wrote extensively about detachment from all of it. He did not preach poverty as virtue. Nor did he romanticize struggle. Instead, he examined wealth as a psychological force. What makes his perspective compelling is simple: he had everything the world said should guarantee peace. And still, he warned that something about wealth carries a subtle danger few are willing to name. Seneca posed a question that feels almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. Do you own your wealth, or does it own you? At first, the answer seems obvious. If your name is on the account, if the house is in your possession, if the investments grow under your control, then clearly you are the owner. But ownership is not only legal. It is psychological. The larger the lifestyle, the more there is to protect. The house requires maintenance. The reputation demands consistency. The income must not dip. Slowly, attention shifts from enjoyment to preservation. What was once freedom begins to feel like obligation. You are no longer simply earning, you are sustaining an image, defending a position. The trap is subtle. Money itself is neutral. But attachment transforms it. When losing it feels like losing yourself, roles have quietly reversed. The possession is no longer passive. It has become a master you must constantly appease. Seneca posed a question that feels almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. Do you own your wealth, or does it own you? At first, the answer seems obvious. If your name is on the account, if the house is in your possession, if the investments grow under your control, then clearly you are the owner. But ownership is not only legal. It is psychological. The larger the lifestyle, the more there is to protect. The house requires maintenance. The reputation demands consistency. The income must not dip. Slowly, attention shifts from enjoyment to preservation. What was once freedom begins to feel like obligation. You are no longer simply earning, you are sustaining an image, defending a position. The trap is subtle. Money itself is neutral. But attachment transforms it. When losing it feels like losing yourself, roles have quietly reversed. The possession is no longer passive. It has become a master you must constantly appease. Seneca posed a question that feels almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. Do you own your wealth, or does it own you? At first, the answer seems obvious. If your name is on the account, if the house is in your possession, if the investments grow under your control, then clearly you are the owner. But ownership is not only legal. It is psychological. The larger the lifestyle, the more there is to protect. The house requires maintenance. The reputation demands consistency. The income must not dip. Slowly, attention shifts from enjoyment to preservation. What was once freedom begins to feel like obligation. You are no longer simply earning, you are sustaining an image, defending a position. The trap is subtle. Money itself is neutral. But attachment transforms it. When losing it feels like losing yourself, roles have quietly reversed. The possession is no longer passive. It has become a master you must constantly appease. There is a quiet irony in accumulation. The more you gather, the more fragile everything begins to feel. A smaller bank account limits possibility, but it also limits exposure. As wealth expands, so does the list of things that could go wrong. Markets could fall. Opportunities could vanish. Reputations could shift. What once felt like security slowly becomes something that must be guarded. Seneca noticed this contradiction centuries ago. He observed that those surrounded by abundance often sleep lightly, alert to threats that may never arrive. Their minds rehearse loss even in moments of comfort. The fear is rarely spoken aloud, but it lingers beneath conversations about growth and strategy. Security was the original promise. Yet if wealth multiplies imagined catastrophes and sharpens vigilance, something unexpected happens. Protection begins to feel like pressure. And a difficult question surfaces quietly: if it increases fear, can it truly be called safety? Comfort feels harmless at first. After long effort, it seems earned. Softer beds, easier options, immediate solutions. Wealth makes friction disappear. In small doses, this feels like progress. Why struggle unnecessarily when you can afford convenience? But Seneca warned that constant ease changes a person. When every discomfort is removed, tolerance weakens. Small inconveniences begin to feel intolerable. Delays feel like insults. Ordinary challenges feel overwhelming. The mind, unused to resistance, becomes reactive. Comfort, once a reward, quietly turns into a requirement. To counter this, Seneca practiced voluntary hardship. Simple meals. Modest clothing. Temporary restraint. Not to reject wealth, but to remain capable without it. Without contrast, comfort becomes invisible and indispensable. With contrast, it becomes optional. The unsettling thought is this: wealth may not only provide ease, it may also erode endurance. And if resilience fades, what remains when conditions inevitably change? Wealth rarely exists in isolation. It is almost always measured against someone else. A salary only feels impressive until a higher one appears. A home only feels luxurious until you step inside a larger one. The mind does not ask, "Is this enough?" It asks, "Where do I stand?" And that question has no stable answer. Seneca understood that comparison quietly corrupts abundance. When value becomes relative, satisfaction becomes fragile. Even great fortune can feel insufficient if someone nearby possesses more. Envy does not require poverty, it only requires hierarchy. And hierarchy has no ceiling. In a world where visibility is constant, comparison accelerates. Every scroll reveals a higher rung. The result is subtle but persistent: contentment erodes not because resources are lacking, but because ranking never ends. If wealth is always positioned inside an infinite ladder, stability becomes impossible. The pursuit continues, not from need, but from comparison's quiet pressure. It is important to slow down here, because Seneca is often misunderstood. He did not preach that money is corrupting by nature, nor did he claim that poverty makes someone virtuous. For him, wealth was indifferent. It carried no moral charge on its own. Gold does not distort character, it reveals it. The same fortune can fund generosity or inflate arrogance. The material itself remains neutral. What concerned him was attachment. When comfort becomes necessity, when status becomes identity, when loss feels like personal collapse, the problem is no longer financial. It is psychological. Dependence, not possession, creates vulnerability. This distinction matters. It removes the romanticism of poverty and the condemnation of success. The conversation shifts from how much you have to how tightly you cling. Wealth can be enjoyed, used, even expanded. But the moment it defines your stability, it quietly takes control. Seneca offered a practice that feels almost counterintuitive in a culture built on upgrades. He suggested deliberately stepping into simplicity from time to time. Eat plain food. Wear modest clothing. Live, briefly, as if your wealth had vanished. Not as punishment. Not as performance. But as rehearsal. The purpose was not self-denial. It was clarity. When you experience that you can endure less comfort without collapsing, something shifts internally. The imagined catastrophe loses intensity. The fear of losing luxury softens because you have already faced its absence and survived. This is not about glorifying struggle. It is about weakening fear's grip. If you know you can function without excess, you stop negotiating your peace around its preservation. Wealth becomes preference, not necessity. In that quiet experiment, anxiety shrinks. And with it, the silent power money once held over your sense of safety begins to loosen. For many of us, freedom is a financial number. A target that promises escape from obligation. Once reached, we imagine we will finally act without constraint, speak without fear, live without compromise. Money, in this view, is the key that unlocks independence. Seneca saw it differently. To him, freedom was not the expansion of options, but the reduction of disturbance. A person was free when shifts in fortune did not shake their inner balance. Gains did not inflate them. Losses did not collapse them. Their stability did not depend on external fluctuation. Wealth can certainly widen choices. It can remove certain pressures. But if every downturn creates panic, and every comparison triggers insecurity, the emotional range narrows. Attachment tightens the leash. So the question changes. Not how much control do you have over your circumstances, but how much control do your circumstances have over you? In that distinction, freedom takes on a quieter, deeper meaning. There is a certain calm that comes from no longer being dazzled. Not cynical. Not dismissive. Simply steady. To see wealth, your own or someone else's, and feel neither inferiority nor superiority is rare. Most reactions fall into admiration, envy, pride, or quiet comparison. To be unimpressed is to step outside that reflex. Seneca admired this posture. It suggested that value had already been located elsewhere. When money no longer defines worth, it loses its emotional charge. You can use it without worshipping it. You can lose it without collapsing. It becomes a tool, not a mirror. This neutrality is not indifference to comfort or opportunity. It is independence from psychological disturbance. And there is strength in that composure. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that quietly signals sufficiency from within. From here, application becomes possible. If Seneca were observing today, he might recognize the pattern instantly. The language has changed, but the tension feels familiar. Hustle culture praises constant motion. Rest becomes weakness. Slowing down feels irresponsible. Productivity is worn like a badge, and income becomes proof of personal value. Wealth is no longer just security, it is identity. For entrepreneurs and driven professionals, the pressure is subtle but constant. Build faster. Scale higher. Optimize everything. Even leisure is measured in efficiency. The mind rarely stops calculating the next move. Success is celebrated publicly, which makes the comparison sharper and the urgency louder. What once took decades to accumulate can now shift overnight, intensifying both ambition and anxiety. In this environment, Seneca's warnings no longer feel ancient. They feel diagnostic. When achievement defines worth and motion replaces reflection, the trap tightens quietly. And the mind grows restless in ways it struggles to name. If Seneca were observing today, he might recognize the pattern instantly. The language has changed, but the tension feels familiar. Hustle culture praises constant motion. Rest becomes weakness. Slowing down feels irresponsible. Productivity is worn like a badge, and income becomes proof of personal value. Wealth is no longer just security, it is identity. For entrepreneurs and driven professionals, the pressure is subtle but constant. Build faster. Scale higher. Optimize everything. Even leisure is measured in efficiency. The mind rarely stops calculating the next move. Success is celebrated publicly, which makes the comparison sharper and the urgency louder. What once took decades to accumulate can now shift overnight, intensifying both ambition and anxiety. In this environment, Seneca's warnings no longer feel ancient. They feel diagnostic. When achievement defines worth and motion replaces reflection, the trap tightens quietly. And the mind grows restless in ways it struggles to name. In earlier times, wealth was visible only within limited circles. Today, it is broadcast. Social media has turned success into a constant performance. Cars, vacations, watches, offices with skyline views, each image carefully framed. What was once private achievement becomes public theater. For a digitally immersed audience, this spectacle is unavoidable. Even if you scroll casually, you are exposed to curated highlights of someone else's progress. The comparison is no longer occasional, it is continuous. And the mind, almost automatically, measures itself against what it sees. The danger is subtle. Wealth begins to serve display rather than purpose. Decisions shift from "what do I need" to "how will this look?" The line between genuine enjoyment and strategic presentation blurs. Without noticing, identity becomes entangled with audience reaction. In this environment, accumulation is not just about comfort or security. It is about visibility. And visibility quietly reshapes desire itself. At first, upgrades feel harmless. A better apartment. A newer car. Higher quality habits. After working hard, it seems reasonable to improve your surroundings. And for a while, it feels like progress. The external world begins to reflect your internal effort. But slowly, what once felt optional becomes expected. The nicer place is no longer a treat, it is the standard. The upgraded lifestyle develops fixed costs, financial and psychological. Commitments expand. Obligations multiply. Flexibility narrows without announcing itself. As income rises, expenses tend to follow closely behind. Not always recklessly, but predictably. The gap that once represented freedom begins to shrink. Walking away from a job becomes harder. Taking a slower season feels riskier. The room to maneuver quietly tightens. Nothing dramatic has happened. No visible chains appear. Yet dependency grows through comfort. And one day, you realize the lifestyle you built to express freedom now requires constant effort just to maintain. There is always a number in the distance. A milestone that promises relief. Once I reach this level, things will settle. Once I secure this amount, I will finally feel stable. For goal-oriented minds, this structure feels logical. Clear targets create direction. Progress creates momentum. But the finish line rarely stays still. When one goal is reached, another quietly replaces it. Markets change. Standards shift. Peers advance. What once looked like security now appears average. The sense of arrival dissolves into a new horizon. Seneca understood that fortune is unstable by nature. It rises and falls beyond personal control. To chase permanence inside something inherently unstable is to guarantee tension. The mind keeps scanning for the moment it can finally rest, yet rest keeps postponing itself. The illusion is not that wealth grows. It is that growth will eventually deliver finality. And finality, in this realm, never truly arrives. It is tempting to believe that money changes people. That sudden wealth transforms personality, distorts morality, or creates arrogance out of nowhere. But more often, it amplifies what was already present. Traits that were subtle become visible. Tendencies that were quiet grow louder. If insecurity lives beneath the surface, wealth may feed it with new comparisons and new pressures. If vanity existed in small forms, greater resources can magnify it into spectacle. At the same time, generosity can expand. Discipline can scale. Integrity can strengthen. Money does not choose the direction, it increases the volume. This is the sobering part. Wealth is not a moral force. It is an amplifier. And amplification leaves little room for illusion. It exposes habits of thought and patterns of desire more clearly than scarcity ever could. So the real question becomes less about accumulation and more about preparation. Who are you becoming before expansion makes it obvious? In a culture that equates growth with worth, choosing limits can feel almost rebellious. The message everywhere is expansion. More income. More influence. More visibility. To step back and say, "This is enough," requires a different kind of strength. Not weakness. Not laziness. But restraint rooted in clarity. Wanting less does not mean lacking ambition. It means questioning which ambitions deserve your energy. It interrupts the endless comparison cycle because you are no longer measuring yourself against every rising standard. You define the boundary instead of chasing someone else's horizon. There is quiet relief in that shift. When desire narrows intentionally, pressure softens. Decisions simplify. The mind gains space. Wealth can still exist, still grow, still be used wisely. But it no longer dictates identity. The courage to want less is not about shrinking your life. It is about expanding your control over it. Markets rise and fall. Careers accelerate and stall. Reputations shift with a single season. External security, no matter how carefully constructed, remains exposed to forces beyond personal control. Seneca understood this instability clearly. That is why he placed his trust elsewhere. Skills cannot be confiscated by market crashes. Discipline does not disappear when circumstances tighten. Character, once strengthened through reflection and practice, travels with you into every condition. These are forms of wealth that do not depend on trends or approval. They do not fluctuate with public opinion. This kind of security feels different. It is quieter, less visible, but far more stable. You can lose possessions and still remain capable. You can lose status and still retain integrity. When resilience becomes the foundation, fortune loses its power to terrify. This was the security Seneca valued most, not what fills accounts, but what steadies the mind. The dark truth is not that wealth is evil or that ambition is misguided. It is simpler, and therefore harder to confront. If fear is the engine behind the pursuit, no amount of accumulation will silence it. It may quiet it temporarily, distract it, even decorate it. But underneath, the same unease remains, waiting for the next fluctuation. Peace cannot be scheduled for later. It does not arrive automatically at a financial milestone. When peace is postponed until enough is reached, it keeps moving with the horizon. Wealth can expand comfort and possibility, but it cannot manufacture inner steadiness. In the end, money magnifies what already exists. Attachment grows louder, or detachment becomes clearer. The difference lies not in the balance sheet, but in the mind holding it. Mastery, then, is not control over wealth, but freedom from needing it to feel whole.